It is Thursday evening, and we've just come off the floor of the House of Representatives, having passed the general fund budget. The House passed the budget spending $27.6 billion. Now, the budget still needs to go over to the Senate for their approval and to the governor for signature, but for all intents and purposes, the House has passed the state budget. Once again, for the second year in a row, it's an on-time budget prior to our June 30th deadline. And again this year, the general fund budget contains no increases in any taxes. Now, granted, we're still in tough times, and this budget reflects that. The original budget proposed by Governor Corbett back in January proposed to spend $27.1 billion. But fortunately, due to some higher than expected revenues during the months of March, April, and June, we were able to increase that. The total spending was able to be increased to $27.6 billion. Now, we're still living within our means because that $27.6 billion is only a 1.5% increase over spending from last year. But very importantly, that increase of $500 million enabled us to make some restorations to certain line items that I feel were very important that we try to restore as much as we could. For example, in the areas of basic education, the K through 12 education, we were able to restore $100 million worth of accountability block grants that back in January the governor didn't feel we could afford. But because of the increased revenues, we were able to put that $100 million back into the budget. As a result, every school district in the Commonwealth will receive more from the state than they received last year. For example, the 3 school districts that are within my legislative district, Cumberland Valley District will get about $1.3 million more than they received last year. The East Pennsboro District will get a little over $800,000 over last year's state appropriation. And even the Camp Hill School District, the small district, will get $240,000 more than they received last year. Now, granted, some of that needs to go to fund their increased pension obligation, but still, we think that will go a long way to helping those school districts get through with their budget without having to increase taxes significantly. A second major area for restoration was in the area of higher education. Now, you'll remember that last year our higher education institutions that receive state money were cut by about 18 or 19% respectively. This year, because they took such a big hit last year, we were able to restore them to level funding from last year. So all of the state universities that we fund through the state, which would be the PASHE schools like Shippensburg and Millersville, they will receive level funding based on last year. Temple University received some funding from the state, and as soon as we passed the budget today, it came across that Temple University had determined that they would not have to raise tuition at all for the next school year. The 2 other areas of restoration that I thought were important and significant, we were able to restore funding to our hospitals and to our nursing homes, putting them in a better position to care for their patients. There are 2 really important additions that I wanted to highlight here. In the area of human services, especially those with intellectual disabilities, through the addition of $17.8 million in this approved budget, we will be able to provide intellectual disability services to about 1,100 folks. 700 of them are the students with intellectual disabilities who are coming out of our high schools. While they're in high school, they have services, but once they reach 21 and age out of the school system, unless they can get a waiver for services, they would not have any. In addition, we have 400 adults who are on the emergency waiting list for these services, and through the addition of this $18 million, all of those folks, over 1,100 people, will be able to get those much-needed services. Another significant aspect of this budget is that, unlike in previous years, we're not raiding other funds in order to balance the budget. Most importantly, two areas that were initially proposed to be raided, for lack of a better word. The Keystone Fund, which provides funding for very important environmental programs across the state, we were able to avoid raiding any money from that fund. Likewise, the fund that allows conservation easements to be purchased for farmland preservation and conservation land preservation, that fund will be maintained without any change. Now, all in all, it's a good budget. Considering the tough times, I think it spends within our means, but at the same time it provides that safety net of services that are so important to certain people. It also allows our young people to get an education, whether it's preschool, K-12, or higher education. It gives them the opportunity to pursue their education, and it also is a job favoring budget that will allow people to find jobs and to get jobs that are family sustaining jobs. Now, we still face significant challenges in the year ahead, especially. Specifically, this budget was not able to do anything in terms of significant funding for transportation infrastructure. Fortunately, just yesterday, the U.S. Congress appears to have reached an agreement on a federal transportation funding bill, which may then trigger the state into being able to come up with what we want to do for transportation infrastructure funding. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel on transportation funding. The other big issue that we'll be facing next year especially is the pension obligations that the Commonwealth will incur, both for our own state employees but also for the Commonwealth share that we pay for toward school employee pensions. That's a big issue, and I know we've talked about that before in town hall meetings and otherwise, but that's an issue that still needs to be addressed. So it's important that we didn't clean out all the money that was in the state treasury this year. If projections go, or if the revenues go as projected, I should say, we should have $200 to $400 million of excess at the end of next year. So it's important that we not spend all of that in this budget. Because we're going to need that money in the future. So all in all, it's a good report this evening from the Capitol. We were able in the House to pass the budget on a bipartisan basis with about 120 votes. We're ahead of the deadline, no tax increases, and all in all, we're hopeful that the Senate and the Governor will follow in quick order, and we'll have a timely state budget with no tax increases, and we'll move forward. Thanks for listening.